How to make your Japanese car last 500k miles without any major repairs. The difference between a Japanese car that feels worn out at 140,000 miles and one that quietly sails past 400,000 usually is not the badge, not the engine, and not luck. It is the small things most owners ignore. It is the maintenance that gets delayed. It is the fluid nobody changes. It is the part that seems too cheap to matter, right before it destroys something expensive. And that is the trap. Because Japanese cars are so reliable, people get comfortable. They assume the car will take care of itself. They trust the manual blindly. They wait until something feels serious. And by the time it feels serious, the repair is no longer small. So in this video, I am going to show you the 10 habits that separate Japanese cars that die early from the ones that keep going year after year, mile after mile. These are not complicated. Most of them are not expensive, but if you ignore them, they can cost you thousands. And the first one is the mistake almost everybody makes. Number one, stop stretching your oil changes just because the manual says you can. This is where people get fooled. A lot of owners look at the factory oil interval and assume that number was written purely to protect the engine. It was not. It was also written to make ownership look easier, cheaper, and more convenient on paper. That matters when cars are being sold. But if your goal is not just to survive the warranty, if your goal is to keep that Toyota, Honda, Mazda, or Lexus healthy for the long haul, then good enough maintenance is not enough. Oil is cheap compared to engine wear, and what kills engines is not always one dramatic failure. It is slow wear, contaminated oil, heat cycles, short trips, fuel dilution, sludge, tiny metal particles circulating again and again because the interval kept getting pushed just a little too far. For a high-mileage Japanese car, a shorter oil interval is one of the smartest habits you can have. Not because the engine will explode tomorrow if you wait too long, but because long engine life is built on boring consistency. Not heroics, not miracle additives, consistency. And speaking of fluids people ignore, number two, if your transmission fluid has never been changed, that is not good news. This lifetime fluid idea has fooled a lot of owners into very expensive repairs because lifetime sounds reassuring. It sounds engineered. It sounds premium, but fluid does not live forever. Heat breaks it down, friction contaminates it, and automatic transmissions are one of the most expensive systems in the entire vehicle. The mistake people make is waiting for symptoms. By the time a transmission starts slipping, shuddering, delaying shifts, or jerking between gears, the damage may already be done. And this is why so many people get trapped. They ignore the fluid because the car feels fine. Then one day the repair estimate is $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. And suddenly, that fluid service they skipped for years does not seem expensive anymore. For most Japanese cars, especially older automatics and many CVTs, clean fluid is survival. And no, that does not mean you need to do something aggressive just because a shop tries to upsell you. It means you need to stop treating transmission fluid like it is magical. It is not magical. It is maintenance. Number three, coolant is not just about temperature, it is about protecting the engine from the inside. A lot of drivers think coolant only matters if the car overheats. That is the wrong way to think about it. Coolant also protects the radiator, the water pump, the passages inside the engine, and the metals that are constantly exposed to heat and corrosion. Over time, coolant breaks down, and when that protection weakens, damage starts quietly, not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, that is what makes it dangerous. Because engines do not usually announce internal corrosion months in advance. They just keep driving until one day something sticks, leaks, overheats, or fails. And one of the most overlooked parts in this whole conversation is the thermostat. That tiny part controls when coolant flows through the engine properly. If it sticks, your temperature management is compromised. And when temperature management is compromised, the risk climbs fast. A cheap cooling system service can prevent a massive repair. That is the pattern you are going to keep hearing in this video. Small cost now, big disaster later. That is the whole game. Number four, know whether your engine has a timing belt or a timing chain. This is not optional knowledge. If you own the car, you need to know, because these two systems are not the same, and treating them like they are can destroy an engine. A timing chain usually lasts much longer and is not considered routine replacement in the same way. A timing belt is different. A timing belt is a maintenance item, and if that belt fails on an interference engine, the result can be brutal. Bent valves, internal damage. possible engine replacement. All because the owner thought, I'll deal with that later. This is one of the clearest examples of how ignorance gets expensive. People know their tire size. They know what gas to use. But many have no idea whether the engine depends on a belt with a replacement window. If you are buying a used Japanese car, this matters before you buy it. If you already own one, it matters before the mileage catches up to you, because timing systems do not care whether you were planning to handle it next month. Number 5, brake fluid gets ignored because the brakes still feel normal until they don't. This one is dangerous because the system can seem perfectly fine while the fluid is getting worse. Brake fluid absorbs moisture over time. That moisture lowers performance and creates corrosion inside the system. So what feels like a simple "my brakes still work" situation can turn into seized components, expensive repairs, or worse, reduced braking performance when you actually need it most. And this is why smart maintenance is not about waiting for obvious symptoms. It is about knowing what age is even when it looks okay from the outside. That is true for fluids. That is true for rubber parts. That is true for seals. And it is absolutely true for brakes. A lot of owners spend all their attention on engine oil and completely ignore the rest of the car. But a 300,000-mile car is not just an engine story. It is a whole system story. And this next habit costs nothing, but people still get it wrong. Number 6, stop running your fuel tank close to empty all the time. A lot of people treat the fuel gauge like a personal challenge. They want to squeeze every last mile out of a tank. They wait for the warning light. They keep going, and then they do it again next week. That habit may look harmless, but over time it is not doing your fuel system any favors. The fuel pump depends on fuel not just to move gasoline, but also to help stay cool. And old tanks accumulate junk over time. Sediment, debris, contamination. The lower you run the tank, the less margin you give the system. And this is the kind of damage that sneaks up on people. Nobody says, "I ruined my fuel pump in one day." It is usually years of careless habits stacked on top of each other. Then one morning the car does not start. Now the rear seat has to come out, or the tank has to come down, or the labor bill gets ugly fast. All because the owner wanted one more trip before filling up. If you want long life, stop making the car work harder than it needs to. If this video is helping you already, subscribe now, because on this channel, we break down the maintenance habits, ownership mistakes, and buying decisions that decide whether your Japanese car becomes a money pit or the smartest thing in your driveway. Now let's get to one of the most overlooked habits on the entire list. Number 7. The first few minutes after a cold start matter more than most drivers realize. This is where a lot of wear happens. Not on the highway, not cruising smoothly at steady speed. Right after startup, when the oil has settled, when temperatures are low, when clearances and lubrication are not yet where they should be. And that is why cold start behavior matters. Some people start the car and immediately drive aggressively. Others let it sit and idle forever like they are warming up an old carbureted truck from 1978. Neither habit is ideal. What you want is simple. Give the engine a brief moment to stabilize, then drive gently until everything comes up to temperature. No hard revving, no sudden heavy throttle, no unnecessary abuse, because the damage from cold starts is cumulative. You do not notice it in one morning. You notice it years later in wear, oil consumption, noise, and reduced longevity. And while we are on the subject of long-term damage, number 8, if you live where roads get salted, rust can kill the whole car before the engine ever does. This is one of the most frustrating realities in car ownership. You can maintain the engine perfectly. You can change every fluid. You can stay ahead of repairs. And then rust wins anyway, because corrosion does not care how clean your service history looks. If you live in a place with winter salt, moisture, and repeated freeze-thaw cycles, the underbody is under attack every season. Frames, subframes, brake lines, suspension hardware, mounting points. Once rust gets deep enough, the vehicle can become unsafe or economically pointless to repair. That is why rust prevention is not cosmetic. It is structural. A lot of people obsess over wax, paint shine, and dashboard cleaners, while the underside of the car is quietly rotting out. That is backwards. If you want a Japanese car to last, protect the structure. Wash the underbody in winter. Do not let salty grime sit there for months. And if rust prevention products make sense where you live, treat them like insurance, not luxury. Because losing a great car to rust is one of the dumbest endings possible. And this next habit sounds small, but it matters more than people think. Number 9. Use the right fluids and the right parts spec, not whatever is cheapest on the shelf. This is especially important with transmissions, but it applies more broadly too. A lot of car owners hear words like compatible, universal, or works with most models and assume close enough is good enough. Sometimes it is not. Modern vehicles are built around specific fluid properties, specific friction characteristics, and specific tolerances, and the more complex the system, the less room there is for guesswork. That does not mean you need to buy the most expensive bottle in the store. It means you need to respect the spec, the right viscosity, the right standard, the right formulation for that system. Because one of the most expensive habits in car ownership is trying to save a tiny amount of money on something that protects a very expensive component. Cheap shortcuts usually do not feel expensive on the day you buy them. They feel expensive later. And that brings us to the habit that matters more than all of them. Number 10. Fix small problems when they are still small. This is the real difference between people who get huge mileage out of their cars and people who don't. High mileage owners are not always richer. They are not always mechanics. They are not always lucky. But they usually do one thing better than everybody else. They act early. If something sounds wrong, they check it. If something leaks, they handle it. If a warning sign appears, they do not wait 6 months hoping it goes away. That habit alone changes everything, because small car problems rarely stay small. A minor coolant leak becomes overheating. A bad sensor becomes a damaged converter. A vibration becomes a destroyed mount or worse. A neglected noise becomes a breakdown. And once the problem expands, the repair bill expands with it. That is the ownership trap most people fall into. Not one huge bad decision, just delay. Delay is what kills affordable ownership. Delay is what turns reliable cars into expensive cars. Delay is what takes a Japanese car with massive potential and cuts its life in half. So if you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. Long-lasting cars are not built by magic. They are built by owners who handle boring things before those boring things become catastrophic things. That is it. That is the secret. Not a miracle product, not a hidden button, not some fantasy mechanic trick, just disciplined maintenance, smart timing, and refusing to ignore the small stuff. Because the Japanese cars that make it to 300,000, 400,000, even 500,000 miles are usually not the ones owned by people who know the most. They are owned by the people who stay consistent the longest. And that is why two identical cars can have completely different lives. One gets treated like a machine that will survive anything. The other gets treated like something worth preserving. One gets delayed maintenance, random fluids, ignored noises, empty tank habits, and I'll deal with it later. The other gets attention. And attention is what creates longevity. If you want your Japanese car to outlast the average owner, outlast the payment cycle, and outlast the people who keep trading reliability for convenience, then start with these 10 habits. Not next month, not after a warning light, now. And if you want the next video, I'll break down the biggest mistakes Japanese car owners make that quietly destroy reliability years before the engine should ever have a problem.